Welcome to tonight's event from the New York Technology Council. Delighted you're here. I'm Eric Germelin. I'm the new executive director. Formerly the chairman. Now I switch seats with the previous executive director. And delighted again to have you here tonight. First, I'd like to recognize our newest sponsor. Time Warner Cable Business Class has signed on as a sponsor. I'm delighted to have them. And I'd also like to thank our other sponsors, EisnerAmper, Google, Power Space and Services, Ernst & Young, Verizon, TGP, Information Builders, J.H. Cohen, IBM, Frankfurt Kernet. And I'm real good with PowerPoint, so if anyone else wants to be a sponsor, I can fit you in up here. Don't be a problem. Also, I'd like to give a special thanks to EisnerAmper for hosting the event tonight. So with that, let's move on to the main event. I won't spend time introducing the panel. I'll just introduce Devindra Hardawar, who's our moderator, national editor of VentureBeat, and take it away.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. So the topic tonight is mobile media. When this panel was first brought up to me, I think it was going to be more about a subscription in the mobile era, sort of like instead of cable subscriptions, now you're dealing with content and things that you're subscribing to on your phones. But I think it's more interesting than that at this point. It's not just that we're watching video and news and whatever on our phones and tablets instead of TV. We're doing so much more else, and everything we're doing on our mobile devices is eating into time that we used to spend just sitting on the couch watching TV. So yeah, mobile media means many different things, and I kind of want to explore those different things. And the panel we have here today is Dan, Erica, and Khoi. All of them are related. They have different things to say about mobile media. They're contributing very different things to the whole idea of mobile media. And I think it will be interesting to hear what they say. But can you guys introduce yourselves? Dan, go ahead. And also introduce yourself and tell us, what is mobile media? How do you define it?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dan Kurani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Thumb. Quick background on Thumb. Thumb is a venture-backed consumer web company. It's a social network that allows people to get and give opinions in real time. That 95% of our activity happens on iOS and on Android. Typical user will get about 50 to 100 responses within a couple of minutes when they post on Thumb. And an average user spends a little bit over 4 hours per month on the product. Which plays in really nicely with the topic of this, the theme or the topic for tonight. That usage, that behavior, we'll get into in a little bit more detail as we go forward, but mobile's grabbing an increasing mind share of users in general, and whether it's a specific use case that we can solve or whether it's just general mind share, I think there's some good opportunities to get into both of those areas tonight.
All right, hey everyone, my name is Erica Berger and I'm the Director of Product Partnerships at Storyful. I have a background in news and journalism, and I was at The Economist previously, which is actually in this building, running product and writing, and I kind of saw what was happening in the app development space and how people were reading The Economist on their mobile devices, both in an iOS or Android application, but also on their phones, and thought to myself, this is interesting, and we started building out some HTML5 web applications, iOS stuff, and we ended up partnering with a company called Storyful, and what Storyful does is curate user-generated content. So if any of you were to take a video or tweet about an event that you were near or at, we would be able to find that. And if there's no journalist or foreign correspondent close enough to cover that themselves, we see you as the next available person. So how do you curate all of this UGC on YouTube, Flickr, even Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, Twitter, and how do you then vet the information, verify that it's real and it's not fabricated, and then deliver this to publishers like the New York Times, Reuters, ABC News, BBC, The Guardian, The Economist. So I manage our product partnerships, which means I manage our relationships with all these publishers, but also build one-off applications. We're working on some radio stuff right now, and it's an Irish-based startup, but I am the US-based employee. Now for mobile, the way I see it is not only is it how you consume on mobile devices, but how can you contribute? So, all of you have smartphones now. Everyone has a camera, and a good camera. So that's changing the nature of not only news, but how brands can interact with customers, how families can interact with each other. You can take videos. What else can you do? So it's more of a lean forward atmosphere now in the media world. And then also I think a lot about TV and how people have second screens. So what can you do on your phone or your tablet while you're consuming other content? So it's creating these secondary communities. So yeah.
Hi. Is this working? Hello? Thank you. Hi, my name is Khoi, Vinh. I am the co-founder and CEO of Mixel. Mixel is an iPad app that lets you express yourself with pictures. We call it a social collage app, where you can pull in images from anywhere, your Facebook account, your iCloud photos, web image search, and combine them together, create really quick, really fun, sometimes really beautiful pieces of art that you share that with the community, and then you watch what happens when the community comes through and remixes your work. It's actually quite unique, and we've been out since November. It's a small company. There are about 5 of us. We're in Union Square. Previously, I was design director at NewYorkTimes.com, where I ran product design for almost 5 years, and we worked on all sorts of things on the web that also worked on iPad, iPhone, Android, Kindle, all of those, all of the Times products on those those platforms as well. For me, mobile is everything that's come after the previous paradigm of desktops and laptops, and mobile's about moving away from entry, user entry via keyboards and mice, and it's more about ubiquitous computing, about how computing is really going to change basically everything we do in our lives, especially multi-touch devices, and especially your social graph and social media, how they're going to really upend most of the things that we take for granted today as being sort of solitary things that you do by yourself, sitting at home. They're going to become much more a part of this virtual world around us.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. What I see here is that we're all talking about how mobile is sort of different than traditional ways of consuming media. It's very different from TV, and it's very different from newspapers and magazines. In a way, though, it's sort of like a combination of all of that. Can you guys talk about just some ways that you think mobile is specifically changing how we're consuming and interacting with media, and other ways that you think it's different than how we've dealt with media in the past?
I can certainly start. We're an iPad app, and we've learned a lot about the way people are interacting with tablets, which are still very new. And one of the things that we've seen is people, at least currently, they leave their iPads at home for the most part, and then they get home and they carve out a chunk of time after dinner, maybe in front of the TV, and really dive into these experiences. So on the one hand, they're not touching these iPad-specific apps during the course of the day, but when they do touch them, they get incredibly engaged to the point of spending 20 or 30 minutes at a time, which is a really interesting dynamic. It's very much almost like a primetime television dynamic, because on a laptop or a desktop, people typically jump around between a dozen or more websites in the course of a half an hour, but we don't see that nearly as much on iPad, where people will stay focused within a single app for a pretty healthy chunk of time. So that's one of the most interesting things that we've seen.
I think for me, because I come from the news industry, I think about how are people consuming and then reacting, right? So how are people not only tweeting and using social media to become a part of the conversation around an article, but how are they adding to it? How are they eliciting responses? You used to have to write these letters, send them in the mail, and then maybe they'd get published in your print edition of whatever you're reading, or they'd get read on TV. But now it's immediate. So because of the immediacy of mobile, that's changing the way that all of the curators and editors have to deal with content as well. And I think it's interesting because it actually deepens the conversation around a lot of what we're reading, listening to, seeing in the world. And for example, I saw a plastic bag today on the subway, and it was an H&M bag, and it was for their conscious collection, and it was talking about sustainability, but it was printed on a massive plastic shopping bag. And so what did I do? I took a picture, got off the subway because we don't have Wi-Fi in the subways yet, which is changing, Instagrammed it, and made a comment, and then tweeted at H&M. And I got over 20 responses within an hour, and H&M tweeted back at me. So, how does that change the way that you interact with your world around you? I think it's pretty big.
Yeah, so I'm going to riff off of kind of both of those points that were made. One is the consumption patterns of users on iPad versus, for us, the primarily iOS in terms of iPhone and then Android versus iPad. For us, the predominant behavior has been many micro sessions on the product. And so whether people are consuming other people's content and reacting to it, which is the predominant behavior on our product, or whether they're posting something that they want to get a reaction, in your case, it's what you were doing, you wanted to hear from H&M, which is awesome that you did. We're seeing literally dozens of sessions per day with users opening up the app. It's a certain percentage of our users, literally over like 25% of our users will open it up more than 15 times a day in these micro sessions in which you're posting things like that, looking for instantaneous feedback, or on the latter, actually consuming and responding to other people. So I think that has a little bit to do with the device profile itself. Like consumption patterns with iPad are in many ways consistent with watching TV and or laying in bed or whatever it might be, where they're actually having like 20-minute chunks of time or 30-minute chunks of time. Whereas with the iPhone and Android phones themselves, we're seeing like much smaller sessions and things are broken up and there's like a little bit more utility kind of mixed into it versus like this larger production and or consumption pattern.
So tablets in a way are a little more of like a luxury thing in terms of how people are consuming media. I mean, they're more expensive now, so not everybody has them. But yeah, you can kind of sit back and dive into something. And that's a good point you made too about how, one of you guys made about how, and I think it was Khoi, about how people are spending more time on a single web page instead of like jumping between multiple tabs and things like that. Or a single app, yeah. That focus, that's really interesting too, because it's very different compared to how we've ever dealt with media before. There's always before been a distance between us and like the TV screen. This is kind of like back to the day when we're just sitting with a good book or sitting with a magazine or a newspaper or something. That intimacy though is important, and it's, I don't know, it's just a really interesting way of moving beyond the passive participation of TV that kind of dominated how we've consumed media.
I actually think it's going to be really interesting to see how particularly tablet usage evolves, because right now it's a luxury item, and right now it's still a minority of people who have tablets, and they don't yet see how tablets are relevant to their day job, so to speak. But I think in the next 18 months you're going to see tablets invading the workplace and changing up that usage pattern pretty significantly. So I'm not sure if the pattern that we see right now is going to hold. I'm not sure how it will evolve, but I'm sure it will evolve.
Cool. Well, one thing that I think, Erica, you brought up a couple of times is the idea of using a mobile device as sort of a second screen in conjunction with traditional media. And that's one thing that's also really important is that mobile doesn't always necessarily mean we're going to give up on primetime television. But we're seeing a lot of things, like I know American Idol has been working with, they've utilized a couple apps. There's one called Peel on the iPhone and Android that's kind of been working with the American Idol, the very popularity of it. There are ways that we can kind of make these things interact, I guess, right? Mobile supporting the existing media.
Have you,
Let's put that one away.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. There's a company called Sonic Notify, and they can embed content and streams of data within a television show, and then talk to your phone or your tablet and send you information and get to know you more, so they can, as the season goes on for the show, or whether you're at a live event, it can, know that you're interested in this product or know that you're interested in this character and send you more information. So you're almost learning more and you're more engaged with the content that you're consuming. So it doesn't feel like you're in a microcosm anymore, but it feels like you're in a community.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that community aspect also comes from social media, right? And the way everything is sort of integrated. Back when we were just kind of staring at our TV screens, like maybe you'd call a friend and say, hey, do you see this thing happening? Now you can like easily tweet when something amazing happens in Game of Thrones, and people will immediately respond and interact with you. That's a big change in how we've dealt with it in the past, yeah. Technically this isn't mobile, but we're also seeing connected TVs and that sort of technology ending up on the TV screen too. And it's kind of a weird category because a lot of this stuff isn't technically mobile. If you're sitting on your couch and look at your TV, I wouldn't classify that as mobile. But you look at things like Google TV. And Google TV is based on Android, which is Google's mobile operating system. And it's built to interact with your mobile devices. So what we're seeing is, in a way, like things that we've traditionally dealt with sort of on their own are trying to tap into our mobile devices too. Google's also working on home automation, Android at home, I think they're calling it. And that will be one way so you could control the lights or your dishwasher or something from your mobile app. Cool. Let's see here. Social media is like have you noticed is social media changing the way you're kind of consuming media in general or on the mobile side? Has it made a bigger difference?
I can add a little bit to that.
Because you have a social media network.
I think there's a couple pieces to this. There's this asynchronous communication that's happening between people, and so there's been these patterns where folks aren't picking up their phone as much, and they're not even checking their voicemail, but they're responding to texts, and they're basically saying, I want to do this on my time, and I want to take off. I want to have a bite-sized interaction with you, and I want to be in control of that. And so one of the things that we've been finding in user behavior is that a lot of this idea of asynchronous communication, where people are taking the time when they want to communicate, is actually leading to, ironically, more real-time interaction between people. Because what's happening is networks, and not just ours, but every social network out there, from niche to more broad-based, is getting better at matching user requests. So if somebody's posting something, there's typically somebody there to consume it. And so as you're increasing the ability to match people properly and at the right time, it's actually increasing the amount of communication between people, although it's typically much smaller interactions. In our case, it's just a simple thumb that has a lot of meaning, but that's led to a lot of real-time interaction between people, and then that kind of like folds into some of these other behaviors that we've seen.
Gotcha. One thing, the reason I kind of wanted to get all of you guys together too is because you're all in different ways at the intersection of mobile and social. Thumb is a social network that's entirely about opinion. It's not like back when when Facebook launched, you had like your interests and your likes and whatever. It was a place for people to go and see what you like, but not really a place for people to interact. Thumb is all about interacting with you. Mixel is all about you creating digital art, and people can take that art and remix it and do cool things with it. And there's a whole a sense now that with social networks like these, that you're doing things. You're not just viewing what other people are doing, but you're kind of actively participating too. And with Storyful, what we're seeing too is that could you explain?
Yeah, absolutely.
Deeper?
So the only reason Storyful exists is because of mobile content. So we are finding people that are finding video and tweets, and literally there's a community around every news event. And so we are finding the best mobile content and then allowing publishers to feel comfortable enough that we've vetted it, that they can actually push it out. So Good Morning America used 20 minutes of content that we surfaced the other morning for an hour-and-a-half show live. That's pretty amazing. So, if Mixel and Thumb didn't exist, and these communities on Twitter and YouTube and Flickr and Vimeo and what have you didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. So it's really about engaging the larger audience, not only around professional content, but citizen content.
It's interesting that because a lot of these interactions have become so much lighter. I think the rule of thumb was what, 99 to 1 was there was one person that produced content and 99% actually consumed it. And because the interactions themselves have changed and become so much lighter, it's almost as if everybody's become a producer. And when you aggregate that, the interactions have really increased, and it creates a lot of opportunities, like one that you guys have tackled for sure.
So I guess from your experience, what advice could you give anybody looking to, kind of step into mobile with their business or something that they're doing? Are there any pitfalls that they should avoid? Are there any things you've learned in particular that you'd like to pass on?
Is that for me?
Anybody, really?
I think it would depend on the business. I think if you're a retailer, there's one particular way that you handle mobile. If you're a company that potentially is providing a utility, just to take I was using the Uber example before, and GroundLink could beat them
Could
to
you
the punch.
explain Uber?
So Uber is a car service where you can use your iPhone to call it up. I believe they're on Android as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but you hit a button that says pick me up now. After you register, you say pick me up now. It tells you exactly how far away a driver is, and
You could track the car coming to you.
you see the car coming to you. So on a rainy night, you're underneath the canopy trying to figure out how you're going to get out of there, and there's not a taxi in sight. In any major city, you have an opportunity to hop in one of those cars, and even from a price point standpoint, it's not more than about 20% more than a cab. They fold everything into your credit card. You don't have to take cash or a credit card out once you have an account. And GroundLink is a typical, it's a bricks and mortar type business, and they came on much, much later than that. It took them some time to build the infrastructure, but if you're that type of business where you can actually solve a real world problem on the go for a user, you have the potential, if you're that type of business, to build something, do an even bigger business than what you built. For the retailer, it's like a different story. It's more of it's like another screen. It's like another screen, basically.
Absolutely.
I think for me, the biggest impact that I've seen in good mobile versus bad mobile and people entering the market is design. So design is incredibly important, and user experience design. So how are you thinking about how people are going to be using whatever you're building, right? And I think a really good example is, you look at MySpace and the internet 10, 15 years ago, and then you look at...
GeoCities.
Huh? Yeah,
GeoCities.
GeoCities. And now you look at, sites like Tumblr, and you realize design has evolved a lot, and more people are aware of it. And I think that is probably the biggest thing you should pay attention to after you research what other products are out in the market. Design your product well, and design it and get other people's feedback as much as possible, because that makes for a higher success rate. What would you say, Khoi? You're the designer, right?
I think design is overrated. I would obviously agree with that. I think design is a big point of differentiation for a lot of apps, and it's getting harder and harder too. Apple on iOS, anyway, Apple can make any app look at least somewhat decent, and so you really have to bring your A game to make sure that the app that you're building is not just 100% better than it would have been on a website, but like 120% better than it would have been on a website. So it's the bar is getting higher and higher for high-class user experience. I don't know if there's, aside from that, I don't know if there's any one piece of advice that I would offer for mobile, other than have good design, and other than be willing to try a lot of different things until you learn how the app that you're building or the experience that you're building fits into your users' lives, and don't count on getting it right the first time. I think that's really, really critical, and any good designer, any good mobile designer will understand that's part of what it takes to create a great product.
I think the design aspect is particularly interesting, because all these devices we're much more intimate with them than we ever were with anything else. Back with desktop computers and even your laptop, there was always something separating you from the device. Either it was your keyboard and mouse, or just the screen itself. It seems like things are different now when you're actually forced to touch and hold a device much closer to you.
I think that's exactly right. I'm just going to say, yeah, that's exactly right. It's a very, very intimate experience right now, and Yeah, but just going back to Twin Cities, like we've come so far, and people expect a different kind of experience than they did even 5 years ago.
I guess, I mean, it sort of makes sense that Apple was the company to kind of spearhead the whole new wave of mobile, because Apple always pushed design. On the desktop, you know, that was great, but people, I don't think, truly saw the value of that philosophy until you kind of were restricted in a Zen-like way to like a much smaller screen size. And you could only look at one app at a time. That seemed to just change the way we deal with computing in general.
I just think it goes to the fact that we don't really know what technology is going to look like. I think 20 years ago, technology looked so different, and the way we imagined that it would look in the future is so different from now. And as it evolves, it takes on different characteristics, and as new people come into it, it's even 5 years from now, it's going to be very different again.
I guess like one big takeaway that you could take from some of the stuff in this panel, and that I've seen in other panels too, is that, you know, yeah, it's hard to predict technology, and what people tend to do when they're, you know, building their first mobile app or a mobile website or something, they tend to think about like how things were back in the desktop era. You know, this is how things always used to work. Let's take that and apply that to mobile. I think what we're seeing is that fundamentally we have to rethink how users interact with devices and how they actually live with these things. So yeah.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, essentially you have to take a fresh look at whatever it is that you're doing, if you're creating something new or if you're evolving something that is already existing. Even like using that car service as an example. When the device profile changes, it may solve a new problem that you didn't anticipate. So, I mean, this might not be here, you know, very soon. Maybe in 3 years, 4 years, it might not be here. And Khoi will already have it on, you know, on the thing where I'm tabbing the table. It already projects a white screen on it. So you have to look at it fresh for sure.
Relatedly, I would say to all of you to let kids test your products, because you'd be surprised what a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old will give you as feedback, because they're just so used to this. They're digital natives, right? My nephew the other day swiped his hand in front of the microwave and expected it to do something and didn't understand why he had to press buttons and, you know, switch a dial. So think out of the box when you're thinking about your testers.
My kids could have predicted the Angry Birds success. Put it that way. Years ago, came out of the shower and our 4-year-old was on it. Like, he figured out how to unlock my phone and was on Angry Birds just playing, and I couldn't pull him away.
Very nice. What we're also seeing too, I think like the best parts of mobile are quickly beginning to bleed into other aspects of computing as well. You look at Windows 8. That for Microsoft is a really interesting decision for them. So if you haven't seen it or if you haven't heard, Windows 8 is like this broader initiative by Microsoft to invade both tablets and desktops and also ultra-thin laptops as well. Windows 8 doesn't look like anything like Windows has ever looked before. It looks a lot like Windows Phone. So there are a couple, there's square icons. You have a quick glance of everything happening on your system at one time, and just like mobile, you have to focus back on one app. So are there any other ways that you guys are seeing mobile bleeding over back into traditional forms of computing?
Well, desktop operating systems in general are going to be like that. Obviously, Apple's doing that with macOS 10. Google's trying to do it with Chrome notebooks, that sort of thing. I think what's really interesting is it becomes the expectation for how any kind of computing technology works anywhere. Just like in the example of a kid swiping a microwave, and that's why I think in a number of years there's going to be very little difference between what we call an iPad today and what we call a notebook today, and so forth. So these things are merging and becoming or mutating into something that we're just getting a glimpse of now.
I would say the one thing that we've been seeing trend-wise in terms of what's been kind of ported back to desktop experiences is the simplicity. Mm-hmm. So there tends to be more of like one core feature or one core value prop or core utility to that thing that people maybe even originally baked in mobile and then it got brought back to the desktop, but we've just noticed a simplification overall on the desktop experience.
I think from a news perspective, you're seeing the concept of an article change. So there's all these kind of atoms, most of them taken from social media. And so people are evolving content around mobile atoms. And it's changing the entire nature of publishing, and it's flattening. It's got a flattening effect. So I think you're going to see a lot of, short podcasts, shorter form content with analysis around it. And that would be possible if there wasn't mobile.
Gotcha. It's funny you bring up podcasts too. I do a few podcasts. That's one thing that wouldn't really even be, it was popular back when the iPods were around, and we thought that was the hot new thing. But when you have a device that's always on, always connected, all sorts of new things open up. And now we're seeing LTE networks roll out, across the U.S. They're becoming a little more ubiquitous too. Is there anything in particular what's the one thing that you've been wishing for on the mobile media side? For me, it's like great video conferencing that'll work from anywhere. Is there anything that you guys have been hoping for? And then we can open up for questions.
I wish all the big tech companies would get along better, because I know the other day I was walking to a conference and I had my phone with me, and I thought we were going to have a 30-person company Skype, but it turned out we were having a Google Hangout, and Google Hangout doesn't work on iOS phones, so I couldn't join our conference call. And I just had a moment, and I was like, technology is supposed to make our lives easier, not more complex. So I would really like these companies to come together and create, complementary systems, not fight.
Cool. Do we have any questions? You, sir.
The new iPhone is going to have a larger screen, sort of like 4 inches across, and the new iPad that's coming down to 7 inches. At what point in time are those going to converge, and you're going to say, well, okay, I don't want such a big choice, I want what really works for me.
I think
human nature changes all the time.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like the way we've talked about things, so much has changed over the last few years. It's like we're in the Wild West when it comes to mobile, right? We don't exactly know how this whole thing is going to play out. You're seeing some companies like Samsung has kind of gone crazy with this. Samsung has a 10-inch tablet. They have an 8.9-inch tablet. They have a 7-inch tablet. And they have several variations of these too. And then they started making their phones bigger. So now they have this thing called the Galaxy Note, which is this weird monstrosity that's like 5.3 inches. Not quite a phone, not quite a tablet, but they're trying to mix it as both. I think we're still learning from what we're seeing here. But I guess one thing we should probably do is look to Apple, just because the philosophy of that company kind of foresaw how certain things would work, right?
Well, the 4-inch iPhone and the 7-inch iPad are rumors only, and those.
The 4-inch is going to happen. It's totally.
Yeah.
I would put money on that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think what really distinguishes the two, regardless of what the size is the iPhone is an intensely personal device. It remains to be seen if the iPad is going to become that as well. But right now, what we see a lot of is an iPad is a family computer. At least it's a highly shareable computer that more people feel very comfortable passing back and forth in the way they didn't feel comfortable passing back and forth a laptop. So your phone is something that you wouldn't really want somebody in your family or at work picking up and sort of rifling through. But that happens with that quote-unquote tablet all the time, and I think that differentiation is probably going to prevent these two devices from becoming one device, as you're suggesting. I don't think there's going to be a point where there's only one of these kinds of things.
You, sir.
I was going to direct it to Khoi, but I'll open it to all. Just related to that, I was thinking, this whole concept, you see commercials about heads-up displays. So you talk about intimacy of these devices. What's your view on that? Are the heads-up displays going to be something that you can integrate with mobile and people are going to like, or maybe humans just don't like that? Maybe they really like this intimacy of screens.
Have you guys all seen the crazy Google Glass video? The guy walking through New York and he's like, it's all in his glasses. Do you guys have any response?
I think it's too early. I mean, it's it's demonstration technology right now. It's not fully commercialized. You can't walk into a Best Buy and get it. So I think it's way too early to really get a sense of how that's going to impact it. I mean, this demonstration technology frequently turns out to be, illusory. Like we think it's coming. We thought
virtual reality
was going to come, and people were making predictions how it was going to impact personal computing, and it may be very, very, inevitable that heads-up displays will get here. But once it's fully commercialized, it's going to be very different from what we see in the Google's prototypes.
You think about the video phone. You go back to watch, the Space Odyssey 2001, right? We're going to have the video phone. It never happened.
Well,
it never happened.
We have it.
It's FaceTime.
You have it
There's
today.
FaceTime.
Yes.
But you didn't have it when you could have had it.
Right.
On
Yes.
the desktop.
I agree.
That's kind of weird too.
Same goes for scary, smart artificial intelligence.
Yeah, we're slowly seeing that. There's a whole long story to that. Somebody had a question. Thank you, sir. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just a question. I guess there's been a lot of talk around content. And Eric, I think in particular you were talking about the flattening of it. Do you have any concerns in around ultimate quality of content? And you said there's obviously publishers have that content. What are your thought process? Or what is your thought in around quality versus quantity, and how that's going to evolve?
I'm a little bit biased because I'm a writer and editor myself, but I think it means that writers and editors are even more important because there's so much content out there. So the voices that are able to cultivate this content, find the right pieces, publish it, and then provide analysis around it are going to win. But you also see a trend in long-form content. So there's all these like longform.org, long reads, The Atavist, which is an iPad app that has 14,000 word nonfiction stories that are interactive. People are reading more. And actually people that have e-readers are reading twice as much as people that don't. So it's funny, there's a lot more content, but then there's the rise of the curator. So people are stepping up their game and becoming voices that are saying which content is quality and what's not. And I think YouTube and Twitter are going to start playing in this space too and saying, look, here's all this short stuff that was happening in the news cycle, but let's take a bird's eye view and go back to that and look at the big picture and what kind of analysis value can we provide to the community as well. What do you think, Devindra?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, at VentureBeat, we're right now a traditional news site, but the idea of it comes up every day. Like, oh, somebody tweeted this thing, and is this actually news? Is this actually a story? Before something like Storyful, actually, we used to see, and I think I still see this, like local news outfits, they would just see a tweet and try to report on that as a story. So it is very good to have the curators. And as a new media reporter, like what we're doing at VentureBeat, we too have to be our own curators. Like we have to be smarter about it. Something like Storyful is better for the more traditional media companies who maybe don't have the time to invest in social networks to figure out how things are actually going on. In the back.
I don't know, this is not a question but a statement. I think mobile is the new smoking. And what I mean by that is, it's not socially acceptable to smoke anymore. So imagine, instead of everybody smoking on Mad Men, they'd be fumbling with their cell phones. So I feel like it's a social crutch in a way. Like if I'm getting on the elevator or somebody's getting on the elevator with me and they don't want to make eye contact, immediately they start fumbling with their cell phone. Or if you're alone at night and you're watching television, the second screen experience is kind of like loneliness. It's a way of the mind wandering. So it's a way of connecting with other people, connecting with yourself. It's like a little friend of yours. But it's also a way of disconnecting from your immediate surroundings.
And it's healthier than cigarettes.
Well,
That's
maybe
true.
not. We'll know, when we all have brain cancer in 20 years, whether or not. But that's my little idea.
I see your point. I've heard this quite a bit too. I mean, we're at a point now where people don't quite know what to do with the technology in front of them. So sometimes people don't know when it's too much. Over time, we'll learn the balance as things progress. Like this isn't slowing down. Like we were talking about heads-up displays. it's going to get crazier from this. We're going to have like biotechnology where people are implanting things into their bodies, and it'll have some reaction in your actual physical response system or something. That'll become the norm. So I think at that point we'll see some sort of backlash and some sort of like move back towards a more disconnected way of living, a more natural form of life. That'll happen eventually, but right now, yeah.
Well, there could be a war between those, the augmented people and the unaugmented.
Is your name John Connor?
No, sorry. But that's why I think it is heading.
Okay. Anybody want to respond to this?
I mean, I can tell you when I was, I think I was 18 or 19, I was chatting until 4 o'clock in the morning on AOL. And I remember after doing that like the third night in a row and being completely like non-functioning in regular life, I shut off my computer. I'm like, people will like realize that this is going to ruin us. And so I unplugged it, and I literally didn't, I was in love with my computer, and I just stopped. I didn't touch it for another 3 years. And then eventually I was drawn back into it and drawn back into the field, and now I've given up on that idea that I'll ever quit smoking, let's put it that way.
Yeah, Business Insider about a week ago reported that the Android system was dead. I'd like the panel's reaction to that.
Can you, which report was that? How are they defining dead? Because
They said that the growth of Apple or the iOS now is so great that the Android's petering off, and it's probably not worthwhile developing the Android.
Well, Business Insider published it, it must be true.
I guess I can't comment on that. Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
I mean, that's ridiculous. You have to look at the developing world and what systems people are using there. Like, iOS is not affordable for everyone. So, there's, I don't know about that. That's all I'm saying.
I think there's in the tech community at large, and mostly the engineering and developer community, there's a lot of angst around Android right now. There's been some significant turnover at Google in those areas, which have made people a little bit nervous in the developer community that something's up, especially since the Play rebrand, which was really just a rebrand. It wasn't a new. It wasn't an overhaul to the user experience. It wasn't really this ecosystem that Apple really created. And so for developers in general, it's there's a ton of fragmentation there, and it's extremely hard to develop for. Our product took us an extra, I think we launched Android a year after iOS, and it's still not anywhere near at parity with the actual iOS product. And as much as we love Google and this ability to be on more devices overall long term, the experiences are extremely hard to design and develop for and get like real consistency. And so anytime there's an opportunity for that community to push back on it, they will, because it's tough to create a great experience on that right now. I mean, maybe that will change over time.
One quick thing, and I'll take your question. I feel like a lot of people are quick to call Android's death, right? They're looking at everything, and I think a lot of places just kind of jump to the craziest conclusion too. Android is in a lot of trouble. Like in terms of developing for it, it's more difficult. There's some great photos of people who've there's some Chinese company that has like a table of 200 Android devices because they have to test every single their app on every single one. That's all.
That's only half of them, by the way.
Yeah. And that is Google's fault. That is a problem. But what the bigger problem is that people can't really make money off of Android yet, and I think that's what a lot of people are jumping to. We're seeing a lot of homebrew developers, people who just like to sit and code around. The kids who used to really harp on Linux back in the day, they're the ones who are kind of really doing cool and interesting things with Android. Eventually, what I've noticed about Google is the first time they do anything, it tends to kind of fall on its face. It takes a couple revisions. Everything is a beta for Google initially, unlike Apple, where everything is they killed themselves to polish it at the beginning. So I don't know, the fact that Android does have a much higher user base, the fact that it's cheaper, and you can get it all across all sorts of different devices, and also now in your TV and it's going to be in our actual home electronics. There's some sort of utility to that. So yeah, I wouldn't call it dead just yet.
I largely agree with that. I think it's important to remember there's always going to be a second player in any market, and it seems like Android has enough momentum to go. I actually think Android is probably not dead, and its survival may actually not be hinged as much to Google as to Amazon, because Amazon's done such a good job basically, capitalizing on Google's hard work. And if they produce a phone or they continue to extrapolate on the success of Kindle Fire, it could be really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Go ahead.
HTML5 have something to do with all this?
Like in terms of what? In terms of
Facilitating, eliminating a lot of apps and facilitating cross-platform development.
I'll let the developers speak to this. Like, how does that's like a long-running debate, right? So HTML5 would allow web apps, web pages to do a lot more stuff, things that apps typically do.
Technology Review and Financial Times have abandoned apps that involve HTML5.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I built an HTML5 web app at The Economist, and it's beautiful and it's platform agnostic, and we don't know how to build a community around it, or to market it, or to get advertising for it.
It's so early.
It's early. So I think, yes, it's exciting, and you should absolutely experiment in it, and the FT did an amazing job, and they actually acquired the team that built their product, and they've got daily content, and so that's probably pushing them, but right now the engagement's just like not there compared to native apps. What do you guys think?
HTML5 is kind of a loose term, is probably not the right word, but it's hard to say. First, I actually think that most content, most publishing will happen in the browser, and whether it really takes advantage of HTML5 or not is not a question. I think apps are incredibly great for truly interactive experiences. I think what we've seen in the first wave of iPad-based magazines, for example, is a complete and total failure. And I think it sort of says two things. It says that content really belongs in a browser where you can access it and manipulate it the way you want to manipulate it. But it also says apps are good for certain kinds of things and not necessarily good for other kinds of things. So I don't think it's an either-or experience where we're only going to have the web or only going to have apps. I think certain things belong in apps and certain things belong on the web.
Yeah, and for the people in the back, the question was like, will HTML5 kind of make discussions about apps and the whole idea of apps irrelevant? What we're also seeing is a lot of developers are doing sort of hybrid apps where they have a native app wrapper that kind of has more functionality and they have more social media buttons or something, and then it also internally is pointing to their HTML5 website. So there are still ways for us to like juggle this functionality, and people are figuring out ways to deal with it. I do think for typical websites like VentureBeat's new mobile site, pretty much any publication, HTML5 is probably the best thing because, or some sort of great web interface is the best thing because you don't want to. It's hard to market apps. It's hard to make sure that everybody has a consistent experience across native apps. Much easier to do that on the website.
Expensive.
Yeah. In the back.
A lot of conversation is around consumer-based utilization. I think that the business is going to drive a lot of funding and a lot of purchasing. How are organizations using mobile technology internally across the workforce? Erica said something interesting. I thought I was going into a Skype, and all of a sudden it's a Google Hangout. So what's going on in who's the lead? And just specifically how organizations utilizing in a way that is increasing productivity, that's measurable, that's impactful, that's scalable across an enterprise.
We're completely dependent on Yammer, which is like your social network for internal companies. We verify stories on it. We are constantly posting stuff on it, messaging employees, and we break it often. And so they work with us because they've never seen anybody use it the way that we do. And literally today we got an all-company note that said, make sure your Skype, Google+, and Yammer apps on your phone, your smartphones are all updated because they keep releasing new stuff. And I've never gotten a note like that before. I'm like, oh, okay. But it depends. If you're a global company especially, it helps people stay in touch. If you're running around for meetings or if you're in different time zones, it really improves communication.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a little bit, it's still early. We're still understanding what even the profile of devices that make sense to us and whether it's going to merge in the middle. And I'm in the same camp as Khoi in that it's like, this is my personal device and this is more of a consumption device that I'm willing to share. And maybe it is that. Who knows how it's going to end up, but it is so early. I even tried putting this into like an actual case that had a keyboard attached to it, and I tried using it to replace my laptop. And it just didn't work. I tried so hard because it was like, I can just simplify my life, I can get rid of this thing, and I even have an Air which is extremely light, and I just couldn't make it work no matter how hard I tried. And so as an actual consumer and a user, I'm a human before I'm a B2B person or an employee at a company. So as a human, I'm figuring out how I'm using the devices best for me, and this idea of having an app versus an all HTML5 experience versus a hybrid, it does depend on that thing specifically that you're solving. Like, what is the utility? Like that Uber example I gave before, I would never do that in a browser. I just wouldn't, the fact that I can just hit an icon on my home screen, open it up, and hit the set location, and it's done. It's already there. I wouldn't do that in a browser at all, but I would certainly consume, the reading New York Times through the browser itself. So I think as we're figuring these things out as human beings, as like actual users ourselves, just consuming and using these different profiles, out of that start to become these business use cases. Like our company uses Skype a ton, but we first really started using it just as individuals and as consumers, and then it started to become more pervasive in our organization. And now we literally can't live without it.
That's the so-called consumerization of IT trend where executives and CEOs are bringing iPads to the office and asking their IT managers, why don't you support this? And all of a sudden, the IT departments have to sort of remake their infrastructure to allow these kind of devices that they never liked before.
So in a previous life, I used to work in IT at a large college, and so I'm kind of familiar with like what's slowing things down. IT is really traditionally very conservative, right, when it comes to dealing with new technology, because typically people didn't even know like what the new BlackBerry was or when new computer models were coming out. But yeah, as people are becoming more aware of technologies, it's becoming a bigger part of their lives. Now IT kind of has to keep up and kind of has to figure out a way that fit in their personal devices into what the company wants. I don't know. Definitely the people who have traditionally run IT and have been very slow about things like, let's wait a year before we upgrade to the next version of Windows, which I've argued for in the past.
A year? Let's wait 5 years.
2 years, 2 or 3 years. It's horrible. It's usually better just to wait, and maybe people won't miss the new stuff. Maybe they don't know what they're missing. When they have their own devices, they know what they're missing. Go ahead.
Just a comment that relates to the adoption and use of iPads in corporate America. We're seeing a lot of iPads being given out to sales forces in companies large and small. And they're easier and lighter to carry around than the notebook. And you can make the same presentations to an audience and have communications and everything else. So it is being adopted in corporate America.
There are ways to adopt mobile technologies, but the process, companies actually have to sit down, figure this out. And IT, I guess, needs to learn to be less afraid of new things. So, yes, ma'am.
Some who say that IT is becoming less and less relevant and will disappear with cloud computing or signatures.
I don't know about that. Like cloud computing will definitely change the role of IT, because I've spent way too much time on my hands and knees plugging in new devices under dirty desks, or dealing with cleaning up somebody's computer and stumbling on their porn collection or something like that. So like the dirty stuff that IT used to do is going to change. Maybe there will be less of a need for a huge IT staff, but you still need people there to handhold most big companies to train people how to use the technology. For small organizations, though, stuff in the cloud, that's kind of all you need. Subscribe to Google Docs and never buy Microsoft Office, Yes, sir.
So these platforms are relatively complex. iOS is complex, the language is different than the mainstream. I'm interested in feedback as to what's the labor pool like? Are there enough local talent to develop this stuff?
Oh, the engineer question.
No. Extremely hard, and they have come with they have a lot of bargaining power, And we've spent a lot of time recruiting, telling the story of the business, onboarding people, and it is a very thin market right now. And we're fortunate to have a really good team, but it is tough to get good tech talent, especially in the mobile space today.
That's exactly my experience. I would say there's also a lot of people out there, especially in iOS, who call themselves iOS developers, but they've been doing it for like 9 months or 18 months, which is, I mean, they can make an app, but it's often not nearly sufficient experience for the kinds of apps that we need to be built.
Gotcha.
There's a little bit more to that story, especially in the New York community. The New York community, because a lot of talent came out of either agencies or other, there's a real strong user experience design. There's just a strength in New York in that area. And because of that, in a lot of ways, a lot of the fresh things that are happening in the space, especially in mobile, are happening in New York. There's a lot of funding coming into New York, and a lot of the talent that had kind of went out west at one point in that first rush, they're heading back here, but they're not coming back quickly enough.
Bloomberg at his there's an announcement Mayor Bloomberg made on Tuesday morning where he kind of featured one guy who was from New York. He built his app. He went out west and then he came back. So like clearly, I don't know.
We just hired a guy who came back.
Yeah.
He was in San Francisco for 6 months and he came back.
I think you did too, Khoi, didn't you? Within the past couple months, you hired somebody?
We hired somebody who grew up on the East Coast, went out west, worked for Apple actually, and then when he was done there, he was looking to come back east, and so he said, yeah, come back east.
Yeah, and I guess with the new schools being planned, it's going to take some time, but it seems like New York will be a really interesting place for finding more engineers in the future.
And Facebook and Twitter and eBay all just announced big offices here. So, I saw somebody from Tumblr speak this morning. He was saying that a lot of the time they're recruiting talent from out west. They bring them out here for a weekend, and they offer them a competitive salary and show them around New York. It's pretty easy to get them to move here.
Cool. Well, I think we'll call this a wrap for now, but you can find us and ask us any more questions that you'd like. Thanks, everyone.